All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and attending. I know we're in competition with the Blue Jays, so I'm happy to see so many faces here, so I really appreciate that. We have a magnificent evening planned. Really, we want to touch on a History Exposed, a panel discussion that we're having currently today. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Nakia Phillips. I'm honored to be your host and moderator for tonight's event. Thank you for joining us in what promises to be a meaningful and thought-provoking conversation. A little bit about myself. I'm a City of Mississauga employee. I oversee 301 Mississauga. I also serve as one of the co-chairs for the City of Mississauga Black Employee Resource Group as well. I'm truly excited once again to be a part of this evening, and I encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to visit the History Exposed exhibit at the Adamson Estate, which is on display until December 28th of this year. The discussion is inspired by this current exhibition, A History Exposed, the Enslavement of Black People in Canada. It is a traveling exhibit created by the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21, with our guest curator, Dr. Afua Cooper, in partnership with the Black Cultural Center for Nova Scotia. Mississauga is proud to be the only stop in the GTA for this groundbreaking exhibit. This exhibit invites you to explore the experience of enslaved Black people in Canada, and through individual biographies and archival records as well. Learn how enslavement came to be in Canada, discover who Canada's enslavers were. It also looks at life under enslavement. I think Dr. Cooper focuses on the daily lives of enslaved people, the work they did, their community, their religion, their traditions. More importantly, she looks at the different ways they resisted enslavement. So I'm just going to start off with the land acknowledgement statement. We begin by acknowledging the lands that constitute the present-day City of Mississauga as part of the treaty and traditional territories of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and Wyandot nations. We recognize these people and their ancestors are those who have inhabited these lands since immemorial. The City of Mississauga is home to many global Indigenous people. As a municipality, we are actively working towards reconciliation by confronting our past and present and providing space for Indigenous peoples within their territories, recognizing and upholding their treaty rights and supporting Indigenous communities as well. We formally recognize the Anishinaabe origins of our city's name and continue to make Mississauga a safe space for all Indigenous people. Also would like to read the African ancestral acknowledgement as well. The City of Mississauga acknowledges all treaty peoples, including those who arrived as settlers, as migrants, whether in this generation or generations past. Also those who came here involuntarily, including individuals brought to these lands through transatlantic trade and slavery. We honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. This evening, our conversation focuses on exposing history. Stories that have for too long been repressed, marginalized, unrecognized, and we're taking inspiration from Dr. Afua Cooper's book, The Hanging of Angelique. The Hanging of Angelique is a story that must be told, for one thing, is not simply Black history, but also Canadian history. In fact, it's a global narrative, one that belongs to all of us, whether or not we want to claim it or feel good about it. The story of Angelique provides an opportunity for us to reclaim a hidden past, since much of the Black past has been deliberately buried, covered over, and demolished. It's our task to unearth, uncover, and piece it together again. This we are called to do because the dead speak to us. This quote reminds us why tonight's discussion is so important: to unearth, uncover, and reflect on histories that have shaped our communities. With that, I am thrilled to welcome you to tonight's panel. We have an incredible group of experts who will share their perspectives, their experiences, and I encourage you all to listen, reflect, and immerse yourself. Let reflection become responsibility, let resilience bring hope, and let community bring inspiration. Tonight you'll hear from Dr. Afua Cooper, Justine Lyn, and Dr. Cheryl Thompson. Each speaker will share their insights, followed by a moderated Q&A session where we welcome questions from the audience. Our first speaker tonight is a leading historian of slavery and Black feminist studies whose work has shaped Black Canadian studies for over 3 decades. A leading public intellectual, she has curated and co-curated 10 exhibits on Black history and has worked with all levels of government in promoting Black public history. She was the Chief Knowledge Officer and animator for the Ontario Bicentenary to commemorate the abolition of the Slave Trade Act and led the committee to memorialize the abolition of slave trade. Dr. Cooper was instrumental in getting the Royal Ontario Museum to issue an apology to the Black community over the Into the Heart of Africa exhibit, demonstrations which led the ROM to change its curatorial practice with respect to Black and ethnic programming. Dr. Cooper led the establishment of Black and African Diaspora program at Dalhousie University, where she taught for 13 years. She's an award-winning author and writer of 13 books. She currently holds the acclaimed position of Distinguished Professor at the University of Toronto. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cooper.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for such a warm introduction. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. I want to thank the staff from the Adamson House and the Mississauga Museums in general, and to my co-panelists, and to the people in the background who are doing the tech work. I feel that as a historian, we always stand within a momentous context, that we are somehow always on the edge of great change. If you were to able to project yourself back in time, and this was the year 1838, everyone would say, yes, we're in a momentous time, we're living history. So I feel that we are, whether for good or bad. So, you know, this evening before coming out here to the museum, I was quite emotional because I said, not again, not another time. I was born and raised in Jamaica. I'm from the region. I'm a daughter of Africa, but I'm also a daughter of the Americas. My ancestors have been here for 400 years. And then you hear the President of the United States now making war on Venezuela. We could wake up tomorrow morning and Venezuela is invaded. There are 10,000 Marines away from its shores. The warships have been moved from the Middle East region to the Caribbean region. Donald Trump has issued the order that Maduro be captured. And I'm like, not again, not another time. We lived through the invasion of Grenada. We lived through the invasion of bombing of Panama. And this war machinery will not stop. So as soon as there's a conclusion of, hopefully lasting truce in Israel and Palestine, the war works hard, as one poet says. And the war, all the ships, naval ships, have been sent now to the Caribbean region. And 10 strikes have been done on fishermen in the region, allegedly for smuggling drugs. We don't know. That's what was alleged. So yesterday, Trinidadian fishermen, you just see the drone dropping the bomb on them, totally obliterated. I'm thinking, we don't have to ask what kind of world we live in because we have been witnessing it. But coming from a region that's vulnerable, that's poor, that's seen only as valuable for its natural resources, and that the people, the human beings, are not important. And so we stand again on the brink of another invasion, of another war in the Caribbean for the theft of the oil of Venezuela. There's also a hurricane that's battering down on the Caribbean, Hurricane Melissa. And it's interesting because I'm from the Caribbean, and when I was growing up, the hurricanes weren't so frequent. Now we have like 5 hurricanes per season, which points to climate change, which is vigorously denied by many people in power. I just came from Jamaica last night, and it's interesting to watch the preparation of the people as they prepare for the hurricane. And the preparation itself is a culture, the culture of preparation. It's a poor region, it's a vulnerable region. Seems that the hurricane will hit, seems that the hurricane rains have started in Haiti. People have already died in Haiti. So Canada is part of the Americas, but somehow I feel that story is that sentiment toward that region, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, hasn't quite, cemented in the consciousness of people here. We do have a large Caribbean, South American population in Canada. So I feel quite emotional standing on the podium tonight, because if and when the Americans invade Venezuela, we know it's Black people and indigenous Venezuelans who will face the brunt of that invasion, as was the case in Panama, I think in 1991, when they invaded and took out Noriega and prisoned him and bombed Panama City. The places in Panama City that were bombed were predominantly the Black communities of Panama City. So as we are here talking about a history exposed, one of the subjects that links the entire Americas is the issue of slavery. From Canada right down to Argentina, this entire region was a site of enslavement. When I say enslavement, I mean the enslavement of African people. And within that, alongside with that, simultaneously and sometimes even after abolition happened, was the various manifestations of colonialism by various European states. And then after that, you had the various abolitions, and then we were subjected to the Monroe Doctrine, which states, President Monroe, that the Americas is the backyard of the United States. So we have no sovereignty, and we have no autonomy. And that's why in 1915, when Haiti was invaded by, who was President Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, correct me if I'm wrong, it's either Roosevelt or Wilson, they moved out all the gold. There are pictures of all the gold bars being taken from the banks in Port-au-Prince. And they literally stole the wealth of the country. I mean, France stole it earlier on, but in 1915, and you look at it and it's almost like, this is insane. And you see a similar picture, 1991, when the first invasion of Iraq, and you saw the Marines going into the museums and the archives and just looting the treasures. And a few days or weeks or months, some of them show up, in various organizations that auction these things. Iraq, an ancient civilization, lost so much of its treasures. So, as a historian, it's no easy task, because we are called to witness, and we remain silent. So I'm going to read a poem. It's called Fugitive, and it deals with Peggy Pompadour, who is talked about in the exhibit. And Peggy Pompadour, we named her Pompadour. Her husband was Pompey, and following patriarchal tradition, we're like, this woman can be just Peggy, because she's shown in the ads as Peggy, my slave Peggy. Her husband was Pompadour, so we called her Peggy Pompadour. So she was owned by Peter Russell and his sister, Elizabeth Russell. And Elizabeth Russell kept a diary in which she talked about the everyday occurrences in her household and in the town of York, which is Toronto. And she talks about Peggy and Peggy's children. The Russells owned Peggy and her 3 children, Amy, Jupiter, and Millie. And their father, and the husband of Peggy, a man called Pompadour, was a free man, and he worked sometimes for the Russells. And Peggy frequently left the Russells' house in Toronto and would go off. Now, where the Russells lived was a place called Russell Abbey, which is at the corner, it would be where the Toronto Sun is now, at Front Street and Princess Street, right there. That's where Russell Abbey was, the home, Peggy's household. Like I said, she would run off, and Peter Russell and Elizabeth would have plans for her. So I've taken excerpts from Peggy's diary, and also I use my own creative imagination to round out the poem. There will be another poem to this because Peggy is going to respond. So the poem is called Fugitive. Elizabeth Russell speaks of her slave, Peggy Pompadour. Peggy is in the habit of running away. It would be bad enough if she left by herself, but now she's taking her children with her. She's a very bad woman, a mean slave. She goes to the outskirts of the city and roams the bushes, eating berries, and waded in the Don River catching salmon that still travel to these parts. She has erected a hut of sorts from the brambles of the elderberry tree. She lived there with her daughters, Amy and Millie, for 3 weeks until Peter sent the constables to retrieve her. He returned the children to the house, but lodged Peggy in jail. Now he wants to sell her, but neither Joseph Brandt nor Matthew Elliott want to buy her on account of her fugitive career, though they promised Peter they would. Because no one wants to buy her, Peter has to keep her in jail. He resents paying the jailer's fee. If only this mean slave would behave. Her so-called husband, Pompadour, visits her each day, bringing her food, a blanket, and ginger tea. He tells me that even though it is summer, it is still cold in the jail. Once Pompadour even snatched the children from the house to visit her. Pompey is a free man, otherwise we would jail him too. Peggy's incorrigible son, Jupiter, has followed in her fugitive career. He has just run off. Someone saw him in the vicinity of the Don River around Potter Road, lurking about Mr. Long's farm. Peter has sent the constables after him. Peter really wishes to be rid of Peggy. I, for one, do not want her ever in this house. I hate the very sight of her. After she smashed the fine china I crossed the sea with from Ireland. Because the jailer's fee is mounting, Peter is forced to put an ad in the paper. Matthew Elliott has disappointed us. Joseph Brandt the same. Perhaps someone will take pity on Peter and take the wretch and her son off his hand. I have already gifted my goddaughter Elizabeth with Millie and Amy. So, for the record, Peter Russell was a former administrator of Upper Canada. So he was an important person. And he also got the Mississauga Treaty going that sold tens and tens of thousands of acres of land to settlers coming to Toronto and what is now the GTA. So we're looking at the exhibit, and I want to say one of the reasons I was so thrilled that when Pier 21 called me to do this exhibit, was because the time had come to tell this story in a national way. Pier 21 is a federal museum. It's a national immigration museum, and they hadn't really done much on the Black history of Canada, and it being a federal institution. So as our moderator said, it will travel for the next 4 years, which I think is wonderful. And the stop at Adamson's house is the only stop in GTA. A history exposed, the enslavement of Black people in Canada. I love the exposed title, the word in the title, because oftentimes when we talk about Black history, we mainly talk about the Underground Railroad, and that's fine, that's beautiful, that's perfect. It was part of our history. But for 200 plus years, enslavement of Black people was, most people, Black people in Canada between 1629 and one could say 1800 were enslaved. You did not have a community of free Black people really until you had the migration of the so-called Black loyalists from the United States between 1777 and 1783, and they were freed slaves. So the majority of people, our history was one of enslavement. And that story has been buried in so many ways. And so this exhibit provides that opportunity for us to look at several topics. I was talking about earlier the beginning of the civil rights movement in North America, in Canada, certainly in the United States, that came out of the experience of enslavement and later abolition. As people ran away from slavery, people self-liberated themselves, people fought against slavery, people resisted in diverse ways. When I think of, Harriet Tubman, who liberated herself from slavery and then went back and liberated mainly family members and close friends, but she was a fugitive and she was a criminal. American law states and Canadian law, wherever slavery was practiced, when enslaved people liberated themselves, they were criminal. They were committing a crime because slavery was legal and somebody bought you. Enslaved people were objectified, they were chattel, they were commodity. So when you dare to self-liberate, you committed a crime. You committed a crime of, you're stealing yourself, which is property. So I mentioned Harriet because in all this really dangerous discourse that's going on now in the United States and has moved up to Canada, is that there are certain states where you can't teach Black history, where you can't teach slavery. Museums and galleries are under attack for putting out slavery stories or Black history stories. God forbid that Harriet Tubman, I think in the state of Texas, had more words in a textbook about her biography, than Andrew Jackson. And someone said, no, Harriet Tubman cannot have more words than Andrew Jackson, right? And so we see now today Black history, we talk about a history exposed, we see now Black history being under attack, again, being pushed away because someone said, well, slavery makes America look bad. And I want to say to that person, well, there was nothing good about slavery, right? So we see museums being defunded, galleries being defunded when they talk about these stories that certain people in power find objectionable. So I'm gonna run the slides because I am aware of the time. I guess I just click the green button or something. Nothing's happening. So I'll just keep talking. Thank you. Thank you. And then I go forward? Just press the green? Yep. So how do I go back to the broke out of His Majesty's jail? Thank you. So one of the things I wanted to highlight in the exhibit, and also to link the past to the present is a criminalization of black people, men and women, right? So one of the things when slaves would run away, they would be caught and jailed. I read about Peggy being jailed by Peter Russell. And I thought I would begin with this slide. And this man was owned by Miss William Brown, the printer of the Quebec Gazette. This is May 1781, broke out of His Majesty's jail. On Sunday morning, the 18th, a Negro man named Joe, born in Africa, 26 years of age, 5 feet 7 inches high, a little pitted with the smallpox. That's important, speaks English and French, and is by trade a pressman. So we learn a lot from the ads about the enslaved people themselves. Speaks French and English, makes sense. It's 1781. Conquest of Canada happened 21 years before. Place we call Canada is now a British territory, but he might have been there during the French-speaking. No, he's 26, 21, yeah. So anyway, we learn about him. He broke out of His Majesty's jail. Slavery was legal, and he left. And that's the end of that. The thing has stopped. So, and here's Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth I. I put her there. She wasn't the Majesty at the time when Joe broke out. That was 1781. So the Majesty would have been George III. He would have been the Majesty of Britain. But I put Elizabeth I in all her pearls because she was a slave trading queen. She was the monarch in England that launched England into this slave trade, into the African slave trade, with her pirate slave trader, Francis Drake, and Raleigh and those people. Francis Drake went to Africa with 3 times and took people from Sierra Leone. And she, Elizabeth I, she also invested in his expedition. So you see, black bodies were commodities, were providing wealth. They were being consumed by Europeans. And by the time Elizabeth was no longer a majesty, I'm not sure when she died, 1603 or something like that, the enslavement of black people had become status quo in the Western world and was going to drive the development of Western society. So again, the law, slavery was legal, and enslaved people, whenever they committed a crime like Joe, who broke out of the jail, or someone like Marie-Joseph Angélique, they were corralled by the law. In this case, we are in New France. The conquest of Canada had not yet happened, and Marie-Joseph Angélique had been charged with burning down the city of Montreal in 1734. And there was a law that just wrapped around her, and eventually she was executed by hanging. She was found guilty. So the law is important, and I want people to bear that in mind, because slavery was legal. It was legal in all of the European metropolitan countries and the territories that they had in the New World and elsewhere. That's a rendition of Angélique. We don't know what she looks like. That's interesting. When we look at all the various portraits and pictures of, the white gentlemen of rank, they always got their portrait painting. We don't have that, or very little of that for enslaved people or for black people as a whole. I wrote about the book that our moderator talked about, of Angélique, which is a global story, because she was born in Portugal, in Madeira, to be specific, and then ended up in what is now New York, and then came to Canada, moving along the global circuits of the slave trade. Another majesty, Louis XIV, King of France, he wasn't the majesty at the time of Angélique, but he, like Elizabeth I, he's iconic, he's important. He created the Code Noir. Well, not him, his ministers, because he didn't do anything. They wrote it up. But in 1675, he created this black code, as it was called, Code Noir, the slave code, to regulate slavery within the French overseas colonies, which included Canada. I mean, yeah, in those days, men wore red and fancy things on his helmet. But if you have time to look at the picture, you can look at it on Google. But he assumes the pose of majesty there, you know, with the helmet, and there's a globe somewhere, and the ships in the background, which are symbolic of the conquests that France are making and will make. The Code Noir for the slaves of America, 1685. And again, the objectification, the chattel status of enslaved people. This is from the Halifax Gazette, and just imported and to be sold by Joshua Major, who was a kingmaker in Halifax, not a very successful businessman who had a trading enterprise with the West Indies. So he imported things like rum and coffee and sugar, and would export from the East Coast the dried fish, called salted fish. But in importing the rum, the sugar, and the molasses, they also brought up enslaved people from the Caribbean colonies with them. And I'm just going to read quickly. A woman, 35, a Negro wench, 35 years of age, Creole born. She's capable of doing all sorts of work, needlework of all sorts in the best manner, washing, ironing, cooking, and every other thing that can be expected from such a slave. So she's like a domestic machine, every other thing. She's cooking, she's doing the household thing, and every other thing, which I interpret that to mean also sexual exploitation, because slaves are owned, and women face particular vulnerabilities, especially in the arena of sexuality. Death record of Paul Etienne. Now we're on the owners. Who owned enslaved people? Who owned black bodies? Everybody, anyone who could afford a slave. This is by the Sisters of the Congregation of Notre Dame. That was started by Margaret Bourgeois in the 17th century for the education of white colonial French girls. And Paul Etienne was an enslaved man who worked for the sisters. He died, and his death record is there. So anybody and anyone owned slaves, the government, businessmen, like the Sisters of the Congregation. This one, it never made it in the exhibit, this ad, because through ads, because no one wrote about enslaved people unless they became a criminal or something like Marie-Joseph Angelique, and she had the power of the state down on her. Otherwise, they're not going to make it in the records, except for ads like these. And this one is particularly poignant because this girl named Bette, who is about 18 years of age, speaks French, English, German quite well. She is big with child, and within a few days of her time. What would be running a woman, big with child, to leave in the middle of winter, 6th of March? I want you to think about that. I want you to ponder that. She's owned by Johnson and Peirce, two Scottish businessmen who live in Quebec City. She was eventually apprehended, and she was also arrested because they said she killed a child. They said she committed homicide. Not homicide, infanticide, but because they had no conclusive proof, she was released. What happened? What happened to Bette? What happened to the child? I'll tell you about these portraits of the enslavers. William Jarvis, who had an enslaved family in his household in Toronto. Receiver General, there's an ad, I talked about Peggy. There's an ad that he puts in the York Gazette, York is Toronto, to be sold, a black woman named Peggy, aged about 40 years, and a black boy, her son, named Jupiter. The woman is a tolerable cook and washer woman and perfectly understands making soap and candles. So she's doing the work on the frontier, the work for this household. And she also produces children who are also working for the family. Because when enslaved women have children, the children are not owned by them. the children are owned by their owners. So the owners also owns the woman's womb, doesn't just own the woman's body, owns the woman's womb and whatever is issued from the womb. So this was an important man in Upper Canada. We did this. We wanted to have some kind of representation of Peggy. So the Archives of Ontario, I worked with them. We did an exhibit called Enslaved Africans in Upper Canada. And we went in their photographic collection and just found pictures of people to represent. So this is not Peggy. It's a woman from the McCurdy collection. But we thought it would be nice. She has that look of reflection on her face. And then we superimpose the ad that Peter Russell put in the newspaper on her picture. Enslavers, like I said, come in all shape and form. Here's James McGill, who left the donation to do or to found McGill University. He's selling enslaved people. I had this portrait, it's not a portrait, it's a painting, commissioned, and this girl is called Diana Bastien. She's 15 years old, and she died in childbirth in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. It's such a terrible story, and I thought I would like to draw Diana Bastien. I didn't do this. It's an artist called Komi Olaf. So what Diana Bastien did was to go to the judge of the town, Sydney Cape Breton, to ask for support for her child because the brother of the judge raped her and she became pregnant with twins. Of course, the judge chased her away and she died in childbirth. One of the twins survived, the other twins died. She was deluded and ruined at Government House by George Moore, who was a government legislator for the province of Cape Breton. Cape Breton at the time was its own province. We'll move on. And her burial record is at the St. George's Church. So these little nuggets, these little vignettes we find to tell the stories. We bust down the archives to find these nuggets, to find these vignettes, to tell the story, to give account and narrative of, this thing we call Canadian history, which is about great men and great women and founding people and pioneer, etc., etc. Abraham Kyler, he was the owner of Diana Bastien. He wasn't the man who raped her, but he was her owner. I'll put that there. To be sold, again, this girl understands she can cook, housemaid, milking cows and making butter. We'll move on. And then the resistor, she runs away from the subscriber, a Negro wench named Ruth. So within all these, this entire discourse, as we bring the history alive, and we see how Black people's bodies have been objectified and then corralled by the law, and then how Black people are criminalized, and we find that today. It's like a repeat of what happened in slavery, that we're dealing with the anti-Black racism, the racial discrimination, the overrepresentation of Black people in prisons and in jails. These are just legacies of the slave trade and the transatlantic slave trade. To be sold, there's Peggy's big ad. Black people were also given away in wills. You could give them away. More running away. Chloe Cooley, the resistor. You can read more about her. She resisted enslavement, but nonetheless was sold across in 1793 from Upper Canada to the state of New York. No, we're not gonna play the ad. You can see it on YouTube. And I will pause for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cooper.
You're welcome.
Okay, so our second panelist is a heritage professional with extensive experience in museum archives and cultural organizations across Ontario. Justine Lyn. Justine was born and raised in Mississauga. She's of mixed Chinese and Jamaican heritage and a proud descendant of the Windrush generation. Justine holds an HBA from the University of Toronto, Mississauga, and a diploma in museum management and curatorship from Fleming College. Her career has spanned roles at institutions such as the Museums of Mississauga and the Ken Sealing Waterloo Region Museum. From 2021 to 2024, she served as Collections and Resource Coordinator at Heritage Mississauga, where much of her work focused on 19th and 20th century Black history. Justine currently works as the Archives Assistant at Norfolk County Archives. Please join me in welcoming Justine Lyn.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you to the Museums of Mississauga and to the rest of the panelists as well. My name is Justine, and when I'm here today really to talk about the work that I did with Heritage Mississauga and that Heritage Mississauga did as a whole on Black history. And it was really my distinct pleasure when I first started there that this was one of the first topics of inquiry that I was told to look into. And it was like, well, where do I start? And I quickly became a passion for me, and so it never really stopped, really. So this, I would say, Heritage Mississauga was really the first city organization to look into Black history in a real way in 2006 with Aaron Brubaker, who was a student there. And it was really all new information because previously to that, it had all been, just a side note, a footnote in another history. So this was really the first time that this history was given its fair due, I think. And then there was a few people in between there as well. But then when I started, I felt that it was really important to continue the research because when Erin was doing this, she only had up until the 1901 census. Now we have 1931. So there's much more resources that are now available, and more things are digitized and online. And so I thought it was time that we really relook at this. And my student Rachel McCollum, she did a lot of the groundwork research on this, especially into the 20th century. But it very much remains a work in progress. So the first person that I want to talk about is Dina Green, and she's recorded as a servant or slave of the Chisholm family of Oakville, and she and basically she came to historic Mississauga with Jane Chisholm, who was a daughter in the Chisholm family, and she ended up marrying Joseph Silverthorne. They come to the Dixie area in 1807, and she. It kind of is a very beloved character in the family history. She is thought to have delivered all of Jane's children, and we unfortunately don't know much about her. But that is where she lived at Cherry Hill, which is still around today. She dies prior to the 1861 census, and we believe that she is buried at Dixie Union Cemetery, but her grave is unmarked. And after she passes away, Fanny, Paul, and her young daughter Letty, they come to work at the at Cherry Hill for the Silverthorns. And some stories say that Fanny was that she was an enslaved woman, and that from the United States, and that she came to Canada as a freedom seeker along the Underground Railroad with Letty. and that when she came to historic Mississauga, she asked if she could be married at the Dixie Union Chapel, and she was denied due to her race. Then we don't really know that much about her. We know that she was famous for her salt-rising biscuits, and that the recipe died with her. Now, when her daughter, Letty, ends up getting married in 1894 to William Hutchinson, who was actually originally from Lakeview. We thought he was only from Oakville for quite a while, but new research shows that he was from Lakeview, and he moved to Oakville to be in a more kind of predominantly Black area, and that when there's an amazing, I believe it's the Brampton Conservator, an amazing newspaper article that's written about their marriage, and they say that she was literally covered in showers of rice and good wishes, and that the reception was held at Cherry Hill, and that there were all these people that came to the train station to wish her good luck in her new married life. New research has also shown that around 1901 they moved to Pittsburgh, and that's where they spent the rest of their lives. Probably one of the most interesting families and the ones that we know the most about is the Ross family, and they lived on the Sear Park farm at Cawthron and Burnhamthorpe, roughly. And so it was owned by George Woodford Ross and Didamia Paul, and George was born to slavery in Virginia, and his mother was Mary Woodford, who was an enslaved woman, and his father was James Ross, his enslaver. And so, yeah, James is not a great guy. Mary, there are several ads of her running away, and he never emancipated her. She came back or was forced back several times, and then basically after she passes away, he ends up emancipating all of the children and kind of acknowledging George and the other children in his will, and gives them a fairly substantial inheritance. Now he then uses that inheritance to come to Canada, and along the way he meets Didamia Paul, who's a very interesting figure because she was a very educated woman. She was a school teacher at Wilberforce. Her father was Reverend Benjamin Paul, who was kind of one of the founders of Wilberforce. And then in 1836, they buy their 200-acre farm, and that's a photo, really the only photo that we have of their farm. It was torn down, I believe, in the 70s. And it's interesting looking at the land records, because after a while you see that the Ross name, it kind of disappears, and you're like, okay, well, I guess they weren't, they moved away, and it's the Cook and the Wright family. Well, actually, two of the daughters married into the Cook and Wright families respectively. So actually they did stay on the land for quite a while after we originally thought that the family left, which is very interesting. And they were considered very well-to-do, even amongst their white neighbors. And right here is a photo of their grandson, who actually fought in the First World War and was killed. And so, the family, they very much stayed and contributed to our local history here. Another kind of interesting family is the Thomas Dorsey family. So John Dorsey was an enslaved man from Maryland, and his wife was Catherine Ann Thomas, who was a formerly enslaved woman, so she was emancipated. And it's interesting because, we talk about the Thomas Dorsey name because actually you think that they would go by the Dorsey name, right, because he's the man, but no, they actually took the Thomas name, her name, and they fled to Canada. And they lived off of South Down Road between Dundas and Lakeshore on the 1851 census, and then they're gone. So it's kind of a very transitory point here. And the family actually didn't really know that they were here until we were talking to them, and then we kind of made that discovery. And according to their granddaughter Amy, Catherine was quite afraid of her former slave owner, that he would come into Canada and steal her children away from her. So they are the subject of a history comic book that was put out by Heritage Mississauga, and in that you will see that we have kind of portrayed them as they're kind of looking over their shoulder a bit, and that's why is because of the memory of their granddaughter Amy. But they ended up moving around a bit, and eventually they settled in Halliburton, where they bought their farm, and that sustained their family for many generations. And then there's a couple of black men that we see in Port Credit. One was Samuel Carter, and he was known as Old Sam and lived on Old Sam's Lane, which is now Wesley Avenue. It's a street there, but it should be Avenue. And he lost both his legs due to exposure during his escape from slavery, and he kind of became a very sympathetic character locally. And the township council, they ended up instructing to have him placed in some place where he could be cared for, his needs taken care of. And when he died in 1888, they paid for his burial expenses. And similarly, Alexander Hunter, he lived on a three-room shack along the Credit River, and he worked for a grocer named James Robinson Shaw, and that's a depiction of Shaw's residence there. And he attended the First Methodist Church. He was also married to a woman named Bridget, who is an Irish woman, and so they were in an interracial relationship. And in 1887, similarly, the township, they decided that they would have Alexander and his wife placed into this House of Providence, which is kind of, this institution, which is basically a poorhouse, hospital, kind of a mixture. And he ends up dying also in 1888, and his wife ended up going there after his death. The Spencer family is a family that we have a lot of questions about, and this was one that I was looking into for a long time. And the family, so the parents were listed as both from the United States, and the son, John Spencer Jr., is listed as a laborer at only the age of 8. So that maybe tells you a bit of something about their life and some of the financial perhaps troubles that they were going through. They lived on Agnes Street in Cooksville. And then basically after 1873, they kind of drop off the map. And so I was looking for them for so long, and I couldn't find them. And then I kind of started to broaden my search a little bit, and I ended up finding their daughter, Sarah, in the Coburg Asylum for the Insane in 1911. And then later, when she dies in 1927, she's into the Ontario Hospital in Toronto South, which is a similar such institution, and with absolutely no relations to speak of. So what happened to her? We don't know. What happened in between 1873 and 1911? We don't know either. And so there's a lot of questions with this one. Yeah, but it was very emotional to find that. Someone that you probably all know is Solomon Northrop. You probably have seen the movie 12 Years a Slave, read the book. So he was born free, kidnapped and sold into slavery in 1841, and after eventually gaining his freedom again, he started to lecture very widely for different abolitionist organizations, including the Anti-Slavery Society of Canada. And so he was scheduled to talk in Streetsville in 1857, and we believe the reason why is because Reverend Robert Orr of Streetsville, he was a director of the Anti-Slavery Society of Canada. So we don't know, but we think that that might have been the connection as to why he's coming to Streetsville. But nevertheless, when he ends up getting on the stage, like how I am right now, he was jeered off. Please don't do that. He was jeered off the stage, and he was forced to flee and actually go into hiding. And that is actually his very last public appearance that we know of. So it's quite mysterious, actually. And another kind of newer person that we've recently discovered that we don't know much at all about him is John Gilbert Bush. And he was born in Oro Township, kind of another like black community in Ontario, to Mark Bush and Mary Handy. And Mary was actually from Peel, so there was a Peel connection, but he came to live in Lakeview on Alexandra Avenue in 1923 with his wife. And at the time of his obituary, they said that he had been a porter for the Canadian National Railway for about 40 years. And so, you know, he would be someone that I would absolutely love to sit down and talk with if I could. You know, what he saw, because the porters were, it was very well known that they received a lot of discrimination, subject to very demeaning conditions, and they ended up basically forming the first black railway union in North America. So I really would wonder what he would say about all that. James Marshall is another person that we see now moving further into the 20th century. In 1954, his workplace, he was employed at Avro Canada, so, you know, a very leading kind of airplane manufacturer in Mississauga. And they were to hold an employee tournament at the Lakeview Golf and Country Club, and he had actually been part of it the year prior, and he won the novice tournament. So people were really looking to him and wondering, you know, what's he going to accomplish this time? Except he wasn't able to do that because the golf club actually ends up banning him because they say that no white patron is going to want to play on the same fairway as a black man. And so there's a public outcry, and Avro actually ended up just canceling the tournament altogether. And when asked about this, the club's owner, he said, well, why pick on us? Why don't you ask one of the other, you know, golf clubs in the area? So this was obviously a widespread thing that was happening. You know, that segregation was here and was happening in the 50s, you know? It's quite shocking, but I mean, minstrel shows were here up until the 70s. So, you know, just let that sink in. Another person I would love to sit down with, Victor McNally, who was born in Trinidad, and he comes to Canada in 1913, and he lived on Cawthra Road, and he operated a flower shop on Lakeshore. And he started becoming very active with local politics and different community organizations. He was the president of the Lakeview Businessmen's Association, and in 1958, he is elected as the Lakeview councillor for Toronto Township, and therefore becoming the first person of color ever to hold public office in what would become Mississauga. Oh, and I actually should have said about the last picture is he is photographed in a wading pool in Lakeview at the opening, and I just think that that's so interesting because, I mean, this is, if you think about in the U.S., like they are talking about segregating swimming pools and wading pools and all this, and then here he is, you know, his pant legs rolled up with the other white counselors, and so I think that's a really striking image. Arnold Ford was born in Nova Scotia, and he came to Mississauga to teach, and he ended up becoming the principal and vice principal of several schools here, including Applewood, Gordon Graydon, Glen Forest, and Meadowvale. And he's the first black principal in all of Mississauga, and it's really interesting because he was such a stickler for discipline, and he expected nothing but your best. And so, you know, you'd always stand up a bit straighter, right, when he came by. But he knew everyone's name, and he was a total softie inside, and he would say, you know, that people get into teaching because they think that they're going to change all these people's lives, and then he realized, actually, you know, all the students are changing my life. So a very interesting person. And lastly, to talk about Jerry Brown, a Jamaican immigrant. So we're getting into that kind of post-war immigration wave. And he operated Summer Records, which was basically one of Canada's first black-owned record labels. And he had this kind of Canadian reggae music, and it was right out of his basement, if you can believe it, in Malton. And Earth, Roots, and Water was a band that he kind of produced, and they actually opened for the Police on their first North American tour. They released their Innocent Youths album in 1977, which is pictured there, and an original can be found in the Museums of Mississauga's collection. And just to kind of end briefly, I just wanted to say that in doing this research, I feel that historians of the past have not really valued this history, given it a fair shake. And so in doing this history now, I think it's our duty to preserve it, to talk about it, to make sure that we know these people's names. Like, these are not just people on a census. These are real people. And so I hope that we can all learn their names and learn to care about them. Because we should honestly be incredibly proud that we live in these people's backyards, like, you know, and they were absolutely trailblazers. And don't give up with this kind of research. It's difficult. It requires creativity and patience, a lot of it, but it's absolutely worth it. And, you know, and you see that it's, you know, there's so much kind of diversity in their experiences, and so much unique and interesting stories that they have to tell if we will only listen. And lastly, I just want to say thank you to all of the researchers from Heritage Mississauga that have put their blood, sweat, and tears into this, but there's also many other people from the city and Peel in general that are doing this history, including the panelists here today, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Justine.
Thanks,
Absolutely. Okay, so our final panelist is Dr. Cheryl Thompson. She's an academic public speaker and the founder and director of Mapping Ontario's Black Archives, a platform that makes Black archival collections in Ontario accessible to the public. She also leads the Black Creative Lab, sharing work by Black artists, writers, dancers, and researchers. As well, Dr. Thompson is an associate professor and Canada Research Chair in Black Expressive Culture and Creativity, and has received multiple research grants. And she's also the author of 4 books as well, including Beauty in the Box, Uncle, Canada and the Blackface Atlantic, and staging blackface in Canada. She is inducted into the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists. Let's welcome Dr. Thompson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. You know when you're in a plane and the plane take off a little late and they're like, okay everyone, we're gonna make up the time in the air. I'm gonna make up the time in the air. So bear with me. I'm not gonna rush, but I think it's important to make sure that we have time because I know you wanna be able to talk to us too. So one of the things, okay, I learned press the green button, correct? Yes. Just the big one. So, I mean, I was invited into this panel. Thank you so much, the people at the City of Mississauga, for thinking of me. And if you are looking for any speakers, please think of me. But it was really on this quote from Dr. Cooper, right, that I have engaged with in my work. It's the Black past has been deliberately buried, covered over, and demolished, right? And so much of that, when I go back over my lifetime, Gen X, I think that's my entire experience of education. And I think everyone in here, if you've gone to school here, show of hands, you can relate to being in the classroom like, well, that's not true. Oh, no. No, they didn't just skip over, right? You're responding to the gaps in the classroom, but then you have nowhere to go with that. Like, think about how much of your education you're experiencing a live erasure and you have nowhere to take it. You can't talk to anyone. You're not gonna walk up to your teacher and say, excuse me, you know, that whole lesson was actually incorrect because you wanna pass the class. So you have to you're literally burying your past. Every day you go to school. And I wanna really implore you to think about what that then does to your health, to your body, to your spirit. And now you have children, everything gets passed down, and now their body and their spirit, and how do we then recover it? Like, I'm sort of really on this stage of recovery, and I think I created this platform with that spirit, to think, how can we at least try to recover some of this? And I'm also a child of the 90s. Do you remember in the 90s? Those old enough. If you're not old enough, you missed it. No, it seemed like every time there was a new technology, they were like, the future is now. Or the future is here. And I'm paying attention because with AI, what are they saying now? Oh, AI is here. Oh, AI is the future. And what I keep wanting to remind people is actually the future of the 90s was actually the past, and AI is not about the future, it's actually about the past. Right? That's why they're so nervous about it, because it can remap the past so that you're only going to know what it tells you to know. So it seems like a present technology about the future, but it really isn't. It's going to remap even further what we think we knew of our own past and now tell us, basically, send it back to us in a different format, because now it'll be a digital format. And I think it's really important to think about, and one of the reasons I started MOBA, because I wanted to intervene in the digital culture. In Canada, we have a serious gap in Black people engaging in the digital culture. A few weeks ago, the government of Canada released its AI committee. It was like a network gonna be about AI. It was all white people. It was a sea of white. I think it's like about 40 people. They couldn't find one Black person? So what does that tell you? It means the future, when they say AI is the future, well, isn't it funny how the future is looking a lot like the past in terms of who's deciding and who are the experts and who is mapping the world. This is just a quick side note. Just this week, I was at the Toronto Heritage Awards because I was up for an award. I didn't win, don't worry, I didn't think I would. But it was fascinating to see who is in the heritage field and how the heritage field, they had two categories, public history and the public book category. The public history category that I was in was like an article, a journal article, an exhibition, an art gallery, all these different things in one category. How could you assess it? And then when it came to the heritage architects, they had 5 different categories for architect, and they were all white. And I thought to myself, The question after I left, I thought, who is building our cities? It's the same people who built them 100 years ago. They're mapping the same roads that their ancestors mapped. And it just really got me thinking about the ways in which we also have to start to intervene in the building of our cities. Because our cities, just like our histories, just like AI, is really not about the future. It's always about the past, being brought into the present. And so I was thinking about this, as you saw in that other, I'm not even going to try to go back. Let's just keep moving forward with the slides. But on the cover of my slide was the cover of my book that just came out in April. And when I was asked about the theme, I thought, okay, well, let me try and find an excerpt. So this is an excerpt from the book, page 87, if you have it, where I say, while the 1840s and 1850s were decades marked by territorial conflicts over slavery in the US and really the Americas, the 1860s marked a decade of emancipation in the US context and to some extent into Canada. Canada is created, quote unquote, in 1867. Black actors and dancers, typically banned from performing as minstrel troupes before the Civil War, now gained access not only to the minstrel stage, but also to concert stages as virtuoso singers. This era in minstrelsy had to contend with Black freedoms in never-before-seen ways, not only on stage, but across the Atlantic world. And what I'm really getting at here, most people don't realize this, but in 1865, one of the first roles that the emancipated Black person, Black men in particular, can take on is to go onto the stage and perform as a slave. So when Black actors are on the stage in the 1860s and 70s, they're literally performing their lives as slaves. And that is the reason why Hollywood loves slave movies. They never tell you that they didn't begin in Hollywood. They began in 1865 with the Georgia Minstrels. That was the first one, and it's a complicated history because the Georgia Minstrels were managed by a Black man himself. And what I always say to people is step back and imagine what emancipation means to the manager of that Black minstrel troupe. And what does emancipation mean to those formerly enslaved people who can now go on a stage while still performing out slavery, but now they're on stage doing what they want to do. So you see how complicated that word emancipation actually is? And I think what I really want you to think about in this slide is, what does it mean to be free? And what does it mean to be free in 1840 versus 1860 versus 2025? Like, are we still asking questions about how many of you might work at a particular place and you think, wow, I'm so lucky to have this job, but then you start to run down all the ways that your freedoms are restricted, even though you're so lucky to have this job. That it really is a contradictory feeling of freedom and emancipation. Like, they are contested words that we still have to kind of grapple with. And so this idea of what does it mean to perform slavery, at the same time, what people also don't realize is that the Jubilee singers of the 1860s, 70s, 1880s, 1890s, sort of into the 1910s, 1900s, by the 1910s, Jubilee songs are actually some of the first Black singers to be recorded on vinyl. So that's why a lot of really old white people talk about, I love Jubilee singing, probably because they listened to those records as children. And then when the radio came, Jubilee songs were some of the first Black singers to be on the radio. And why is that? Well, because the Jubilee were also singing songs of slavery. But they were singing songs of freedom from their perspective. It was not so much about the perspective of the caricature of what the white audience thinks slavery was about. They were literally singing the songs that got them out of slavery, or got them through the day, working on the fields, or through the Underground Railroad. They were singing those same songs. But what I want you to think about in showing you this slide is, what do you think freedom meant to them? Because at the same time, the Jubilee were often only invited into elite spaces. So they sang to dignitaries, queens, kings. At churches, They were invited into churches, but again, who's attending the church? It's still going to be a certain echelon that they are performing to. And so what does Black cultural expression mean when you're so restricted by who is in the audience? So I really wanted to put that into the space to always remember, like, as much as I'm up here speaking to you, which is such an amazing thing, I always think to myself, wouldn't it be great if I could do this more often in just a regular space? Do you know what I mean? Where there's more access to people to just get up and talk and have debate and discourse and to do that. But what we know is that Black lives are not necessarily free in public spaces. So how could we do that? Right? So what is the public space? Like, even in this era, what does it mean to be Black in the public square? Is it the same feeling as the Jubilee? Have we moved on? Like, these are the ongoing questions that I myself continue to grapple with. And then that leads me to why I started MOBA. I started MOBA because I wanted people to at least be in the comfort of home and to have a sense of what does the archive look like, at least in Ontario? Can I find something? Is there a roadmap? So I have this little video that one of my team members voiced, and I just wanted to show it so you can get a sense of what the project actually is. It's very short.
Interested in researching Ontario's Black history? MOBA's got you covered. Head over to mobaprojects.ca and try the Archive Locations tool, a free, easy-to-use map of archives and collections across Ontario. Use the filters to select a topic and narrow your search to find exactly what you need. Navigate the map, click on the location icons, and get redirected to the relevant archives across Ontario and beyond. This isn't your typical archive. MOBA's building an inventory through storytelling and community engagement. Whether you're a casual learner or an academic researcher, MOBA makes Black history more accessible to all. Visit mobaprojects.ca to explore now.
Thank you so much, Farma Gemma. That's who did that. Now, ask yourself, why am I not being invited to talk about digital technology? Why don't I have the skills to talk about digital culture? I never get those invites, even at my own institution. They've had events that never even invited me, and I've yet to see one of those people create a platform like MOBA. So it's interesting about who is let in and who isn't. And what I really want to implore to all of you, especially those millennials and the Gen Z, okay, the older folks too, but especially the young group, you have to start to get into the digital culture. You have to start to create a digital presence for yourself where you are in control of the message. Because the future is digital, but that digital looks exactly like the past. That's really what I'm saying to you. If we don't take the more agency to start building our websites, building our platforms in the way that we want to build them, not reliant on the mega companies. So what, you have a Facebook page? Well, that's not really you, right? Build your own web presence, and then you can control the narrative. Because information, you know the story, like, information is power? Yes, but information is actually a currency. I'm not even going to get into that, but think about what a currency is. A currency gets exchanged for value in a system of value. So when you have information and it's a currency, it means you can now exchange it with people, and then it has value. And I think that's the way we need to start to think about technology, not just, oh, you're on the web. Man, 1995 is over. You know what I mean? We gotta move on from that. Again, quickly, I just wanted to bring it a bit local, just quickly, to really get you to understand that we're in Mississauga. In 1968, Mississauga became a town. Sheridan, Arundel, Cooksville, Clarkson, Lorne Park joined the town of Mississauga in 1968. In 1974, Port Credit, Streetsville, and Lakeview joined the city. All of these things became the city of Mississauga at this time. And the reason I want to share this with you is that MOBA and my team, we started thinking about the fact that in the GTA, we have all of these regions, Peel, Halton, Malton, Durham, that were little towns 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. So just reflecting on all of that, what local histories are lost when all of these things merge. Like, you start like I loved how you were talking about the people. It's like, how would you know to find those people if you don't know that they were in specific parts of this region? And so I really want you to start to think about that in terms of our political leaders really not being invested in local histories and local spaces. They want to take you into the region. You see Doug Ford, he's slick. He even wants to get rid of the school trustees now, where there's no one to represent you in the district. He wants to get rid of that. Why? Because they always understand this. The more you can disconnect a people from their local, the more you can control them. It's just the truth. And so this is the reflection I really want you to start to think about. How much, if you're living in Mississauga, how much do you know about where you live? And if you don't know much, this could be a good prompt to start to learn some things. The next thing is, I have another book on blackface, believe it or not. It's out next April, although you can get the ebook next month. And the reason there's another book, and believe it or not, there's a third. I needed to take a break, as you can imagine, because I wrote these books back to back. So I haven't started writing the third, but the third brings us up into the 90s. Why did I write these books? That's a long story. It was not my intention, but I was really inspired by this quote. So Saidiya Hartman, who is a Black American scholar who is really, I feel like maybe I've gotten inspiration from her. My writing, I see where maybe my writing is really leaning on the way she is written. So in 2022, she gave an interview with The Nation, and she was reflecting back on this book, Scenes of Subjugation, Terror, Slavery, and Self-Making in 19th Century America. And she says, I arrived at slavery unexpectedly. I started out writing a dissertation on the blues. To understand that substrate of Black life, I began to research slavery. To my eyes, it was impossible to make sense of the structural logic and foundational character of racism without reckoning with slavery. I was also troubled by the prevailing liberal framework that marked formal emancipation as the end of slavery. And isn't it amazing that I just said something kind of like that? She's my inspiration. I really think I read this book and it changed my thinking, because I too stumbled on blackface. Now, what Black child in Canada grows up and says, one day, I want to write about minstrel shows? Of course not. I wasn't looking for that. I was actually looking for Black beauty culture. And that's what I kept finding instead. So just like her, it was an unexpected discovery. And I decided to keep probing. And as I probed, I realized, oh my goodness, the minstrel show is about slavery. They're performing the characters of slavery. It is a conversation about the North and the South, and the rightful place for Black people in the South and the incorrect place for Black people in the North. That's what the minstrel show is about. And so why you said minstrel shows sort of ended in the 70s? Not really. They just went into people's homes, because there is actually still a desire to locate Black bodies in a Southern climate and to say we're out of place in a Northern climate. We don't belong. Something's wrong. What are you doing here? This doesn't seem right for you. And I'm not saying we love the cold. Obviously not. But the idea that our narratives are out of place in the North is one of the reoccurring racisms of the Western world. And I think when I read this book, and this last line, it's really about, again, that question about what does it mean to be free? And what does the afterlife of slavery actually look like? Like these questions of freedom and emancipation, finding people in the record, locating them in space, thinking about the ways in which generationally, going back to Dr. Cooper's presentation, Canadian leaders owning slaves right here in the province, walking the same streets that we now might frequent to go get sushi, and not even realize that someone who looked like me was held in bondage in this same place. So what does it mean to encounter these? I would almost call them they're memories that are not your own, but you know of them because of the knowledge that you've had from today's talk and your own learning. What does it mean? Where do you take it? Like, what do you do with it is what I'm saying. I just want to leave you with that, and hopefully in the Q&A, we can still have more conversation on that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. What a riveting conversation and presentations from our panel. Can I get another round of applause for our panelists? Absolutely amazing. Okay, so this part of the evening, we want to engage with you. So there's 2 microphones at the front. Please feel free to come up if you have any questions, want to share reflections, or engage with any of our panelists. Anyone? Nothing? We have a question here.
Good evening, everyone. I just have a quick question on the slavery black presence in Oakville.
Oh, Will? Maybe you can answer that.
Okay. I don't want to talk too much about it only because that's not my specific area of focus. But I know that there was many ships that were, taking people as cargo as their kind of like last stop on the underground railroad, and they would come in there. If you've never been to the Ercles Estate, I highly recommend that you go there because they talk a bit about kind of what these people did when they came there. The Chisholm family, who I talked about, I very, very briefly touched on them, but they actually ended up employing some of these people that came. There was one gentleman, I think he started a strawberry farm and became quite successful. There was, I believe his name was Captain Jim. I'm forgetting exactly, but there was several people, and they they started a whole community there, and so that's why Mississauga, we talk about that there wasn't as much of a specific, I guess, a strong black community necessarily here in the 19th century. It was more sparse, sporadic, because we're so close to these other places like Toronto and Oakville that had larger communities. So, as example, William Hutchinson, who married Letty Paul, he was originally from Lakeview, as I said, but he ended up moving to Oakville because it's like, well, yeah, I'm gonna, go to a more predominantly black area. So I hope that answered a little bit of your question, although I'm sorry that's not my specific area of research. So,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I have a I mic'd up here. For Oakville and going down into Hamilton, the whole area we call the Golden Horseshoe, from the time of the French presence into the British presence, when the area became Upper Canada, you did find enslaved people owned by a variety of individuals. So in Burlington and Hamilton, so for example, we know Sophia Pooley was an enslaved girl who became a woman, was owned by Joseph Brandt and also by a man named Samuel Hatt, H-A-T-T. And Sophia Pooley lived in Burlington and then moved with Brandt to Ancaster and then to Brantford. She was, one individual, but there were others. There were others in this whole general region, from the time of the French into the American Revolution and into the establishment of the province in this region. And they would do a variety of jobs, working in households, working in the fur trade, the men in particular, working as canoeists, women helping to cure the fur when they slid it from the animals. Sophia Pooley talks about hunting and catching deers and then curing the deer meat, that sort of thing. So household and horticultural or agricultural type of work.
And can I just add too? I would say I said this when we were talking before, if you follow the railroad, like wherever there was a train station, Ontario gets its first rail line in 1854. So that's the beginning of the rails. Just look, if you were to just start with the Grand Trunk and start to see where all the stations are, like to me, I always think of that, it's the same way you want to know where most people live in any country in the world, well, where are the ports, right? And it's the same thing in Canada. You want to know where people are living, where's the train stop? Because that's, and especially from the 1850s onward, that's really where you can start to locate, and in that region of like Oakville into like Hamilton and all those places, now there might be 2 stops. Back in the 19th century, there would have been a lot of different lines going to various places that would be really shocking, because now we don't use rails in that way. So I would always say to anyone, like, start being more attuned to what I call transit routes and routes of transit. Catch my drift.
Dr. Cooper and Dr. Thompson, Justine. So I think we had a question over here as well.
Hi, my name is Noor, and thank you for such meaningful and educating us every day, and thank you for doing that. My question is, I think to Dr. Cooper, were there any payments made to those who were wronged in the past due to slavery? And from what I understand, I think payments have been made, and the British still make some sort of payments or are getting paid. Is that true for the wrongs that they have done?
Thank you for your question. Yes, to the payments that she's referring to is the compensation. So they're different, just to give a timeline, so we're not confusing people. So you had the French regime. The French regime, the first colonial regime in what we call Canada, that went all the way in this era down to the Illinois Valley and down to the Gulf of Mexico, Louisiana. But for our purpose, we could say Canada, New France, Le Canada, ended in Michigan, across the Detroit River, all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the Detroit River. Vast expanse of territory, which in a way was a fiction. The French really couldn't rule that whole area down to the Gulf of Mexico. It was still indigenous space predominantly, but in terms of colonization, the French. So that ended in 1760 with the so-called conquest of Canada by the British. Under the French regime, there were enslaved people. We find them in Detroit, we find them in Windsor, everywhere, right? So when the British took control, quote unquote, of this land space, the British increased the population of enslaved African people. There were some First Nations people who were enslaved, but that died out. That's another story. By 1760, Britannia is ruling the waves. Britain is the largest empire in the Western world, perhaps larger than the Ottoman Empire. That's another story. And the largest and greatest slave trading nation. So Britain could furnish these places with slaves. Britain was also the mother country for the 13 American colonies to the south that revolted during the American independence, gained their independence, and became the United States. So then, the focus was now on us, Upper Canada, Lower Canada, British North America. So slavery officially in the British Empire ended in 1834 or 1838. Choose your date. It's okay if you say either one. There were 800,000 people throughout the British Empire that gained their freedom, or legal freedom, whichever way you look at it. For this region, within the Americas, especially the British West Indian area, compensation was paid to the slave master because under British law, property is sacrosanct, property is sacred, and enslaved people were property. So the British Parliament therefore said, well, we're taking the slaves from these people, including the Anglican Church. We have to compensate them. So that, they borrowed the money from the Bank of England or the Rothschild family, which is a huge banking family, supported, provided the loan. The loan was finally paid off in 2015, finally paid off by the taxpayers in the territories, in the colonies. But the enslaved people for whom this compensation was paid received nothing. So they were like, August 1st, 1834, you're free now, go do your thing. But what you had in the post-emancipation era was a re-inscription of the status quo that was there before, in terms of society, in terms of economy, in terms of politics. It's only white people who could be in politics. White people ran the economy. That's why we say it's systemic segregation wherever you were, whether you're in Jamaica or the United States or Canada, was the norm. So you went from slavery to segregated communities, segregated schools, segregated everything, even in British North America. Now, we don't know if any enslaver within the place we call Canada received compensation, but what we know is this, that when slavery ended in the West Indies, in the British West Indies, 1834, 1838, many white West Indian families, including the Bernard family, from whom our first Prime Minister, Sir John A. got a wife, fled the West Indies and came to Canada. And they took the compensation money with them and were able to reinvest their money. The Bernard family got payment for 85 enslaved people. That's a huge chunk of money. And all over, you look at Upper Canada and Lower Canada, which is Ontario and Quebec, you find these white West Indian families moving from Jamaica and other places to where they could get white privilege, live the hype life, take their money, and not to be in a colony, in a space where you have a predominant black population. They did not want that. They didn't want to be among 500,000 black people, even though they still maintained hegemony, even though they made laws that said black people couldn't vote, they couldn't get public education, everything was segregated. It's so interesting. I just came back from Jamaica, and it's largely a predominantly African population. But white people still run the economy. White people still run things, as we say. And not just, like white people. When I say white people, I mean planter class British descendant, Arabs who are called Lebanese or Syrians, and Jewish families. And, Chinese families. They run the economy. So there are spaces where black people can't even show their face in a largely African population country. So we talk about the vestiges of slavery. You still see it in these colonies. So no, black people didn't receive compensation. And that is why we say, when I was a kid growing up in Kingston, I often hear Rasta men saying that the queen wasn't the queen then, it was a king, but it doesn't really matter. The majesty owes black people 20 million pounds. I'm thinking, what's that? What's that about? Well, only when I went to high school, I figured out what that was about, because we were taught West Indian history. And the 20 million pounds was the money that the British government paid to the slave owners who owned the slaves. So Rasta inverted that. They said, the Queen owes black people 20 million pounds. So reparation is a real, and it's a living, and it's an electric topic, because emancipation and abolition has not been fully achieved. The Swahilis, they have a saying, the word uhuru means freedom. And in the liberation movement, they said, not yet uhuru, not yet freedom, we are not yet free. So I say that too in the context of West Indian freedom and emancipation, Canadian freedom and emancipation, not yet uhuru.
And we had another question over here as well.
Yes, thank you very much for electrifying presentation. I have two questions, but I think they are connected. So my first question is, would I be correct in saying, when you compare enslavement in the US and in Canada, as you have described it, that the only real difference was the scale of it, how many people, and the brutality of it? Or would you, well, we know the scale, we didn't have as many here, but are there marked differences? And the question connected to that is, where did they, so we know there are some communities, in southwestern Ontario, Nova Scotia, and so on, but what became of these enslaved people afterwards? Someone was saying earlier about Oakville. I mean, Oakville is known as a white place. So after enslavement, where did they go? And also, were they as traumatized as the American formerly enslaved?
Well, if I could just say this, in terms of the scale, you're correct. I mean, United States had much more white people than Canada, and also much more black people than Canada. The slave trade was larger there in scale. But I always say to people, when New France fell in 1760, there were only 55,000 white people in this vast territory and 5,000 enslaved people. So if you do the percentage, you could see that 5,000 is still a visible population. When the British came and brought more enslaved people, whether from the Caribbean or from Africa or from France, well, it wouldn't be from France, or the West Indies, that certainly increased the population of enslaved people. So yes, the scale would be different. The brutality would be the same. I'm working on a case, because you find enslaved people who were murdered. I spoke about Diana Bastien, the girl who was made pregnant, she died in childbirth. Enslaved people were murdered, they were beaten, they were killed, they were raped, they were, because if you think of slavery, think of what slavery is. It's the ownership of a body, a person's body, a human being, by another person. You can do whatever you want to do with that person, right? So, people always look at the United States and they say they had more enslaved people. Yes, they did, but they also had more of everything else. Today, the United States has a population of 330 million people. Canada has barely 40 million people.
And so after enslavement?
Yeah, that was your question. People stayed where they were. Some people migrated within the Canadian context. I just came from Nova Scotia. You still have families there who can trace their descent to the original enslaved people. And also many people turn white. You were talking earlier of some families here in Mississauga who are Peel region, who, after 1 or 2 generations, they start, you can turn white in 30 years. Not you, one person, yeah. Intermarriage, yeah. That sounds odd, right? You can turn white in 30 years. Maybe you get some good bleaching cream.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
Good products.
But through intermarriage, I see it happen right in front of my eyes. I've taught a young woman who, her father is black, her mother is white, so you would say she's biracial. And now she married a white man and she has a kid, and the kid looks as white as driven snow. That happens in 30 years. So imagine over the course of many decades, and some people willingly do that, and some people not. And many people also migrated to the United States, the Caribbean, or elsewhere. But there are still communities of people, of enslaved people. Now, I'm coming to you, Charmaine. Within the Underground Railroad, that's a different story, and I just want us to be clear on that. Because slavery in Canada ended in 1834, and that was when, maybe a few years before, the Underground Railroad picked up the Underground Railroad from Canada to the United States. That's a different story. I'm not talking about those people because they were not slaves. They were freed people. Even if they ran away, they were freed people once they get into Canada. I'm talking about the enslavement of black people during the French and the British period.
And I just think, just to add to the conversation, you know, I study histories of performance, right? And I think the question to ask yourself, to the way you phrase the question, this is Canada, there's so few black people, what we think of the brutality of slavery is really from the plantation south, US or Caribbean. So if there's no plantations, we think, well, it couldn't have been that bad. But then here's the question, then why are white Canadians going to minstrel shows? They don't know anything of the plantation south. They've never been there. They're reading the newspaper and they're hearing about slavery, obviously, but they have no personal connection. And yet, every minstrel show that played Broadway came here. And I mean here, I mean they went to Montreal, and they did every town and city from Montreal. Right? You ever take the Via to Montreal? Every time I go on the Via, I'm like, oh, we're in Brockville. Okay, now. Okay, what's next? What's after Brockville? What's the last stop before you get into Quebec?
Cornwall.
Cornwall. Oh, Lord, Cornwall. We're in all the stops where the shows were, and there's still no black people in Cornwall. And yet, so what I think it's important to recognize is that there is always been a global desire to imagine a black body that is somehow in a state of oppression. There's a desire for that iconography. It's a deep desire. That's the reason to this day they can still make slave movies that never talk about the business of slavery. It's only about the flesh. Every Hollywood movie about slavery, they never present it as an economic system. It's always about the narrative of the individual slaves, disconnected from, well, if slaves are coming in, so is cotton, so is the sugar, so is the spices, so is the codfish, so is everything, so is the molasses. Everything is being traded. So we don't get to understand it that way. So I think because we don't get to understand it that way, we also think that, well, if there was only a small population, maybe it's more civilized, or it wasn't as bad. But I think it's because that iconography of the plantation of slavery that's been so turned into Hollywood movies is really a smokescreen. So we don't realize that it doesn't matter if you were on a plantation. In my opinion, if I'm one person in Quebec in the 18th century working in somebody's house by myself, that sounds a lot worse to me than being in a plantation with a community. So it's about that perspective of what is worse, one person isolated in this bitter cold versus, at least when we go to the slave quarters, we can sing our songs, we can eat our food, we can tell the stories, we can be in community. And I think that is the reason we have a perception of the Black American being more tight-knit than when black people come to Canada. Well, why is that? The last thing to wrap it up, because in Canada, they're still doing it. Where is the black community? We live in disparate locations.
But also, there are discrete black communities across the country.
Some would say there isn't.
There are, well, so, you know, we can talk about
So what is
it.
community? So when I say community, I mean people living together, black-owned business. So there's business, there's people, there's institutions of higher learning, there's like that network of community. There are black communities, I completely agree with you, but that network in Canada, in my opinion, it's been very difficult to establish
so you
that
mean like
over long term.
in the 20th century and 21st century?
I would say, post the 19th century. So we're in the 20th century, I would say post 1960s. So we think of today, there are black communities across, of course there are, but I mean are there Black businesses that are connected to those communities? And then are there also like institutions of learning that are also predominantly Black connected to those communities? Are there restaurants and places, businesses and funeral homes? You know, like when we imagine what community is like, I'm almost going back to thinking about Black Wall Street. So Tulsa, like the Tulsa, like where is the Tulsa in Canada? Like, I think we're still in a process of developing
yeah, but
that.
the thing is that we had those.
Yeah, we had them. We did have them.
We had those.
Exactly.
And so another pertinent question would be to ask, why did we lose them?
Yeah.
I mean, Hogan's Alley, you know, you had a church. I mean, Africville was
obviously
a community in itself.
Yes.
In New Brunswick, you had, you know, other Black communities, so on and so forth. So it's.
But what I'm saying, in the contemporary, it seems to be there's no incentive to recreate those.
We are agreeing, and I think there are incentives now to create those, but I think there are many threads that we hold on to, and maybe.
I think it's more challenging today.
Perhaps, yes and no. Yeah, in different ways. Because in the 1950s, the 1960s, Black people in those discrete communities were also very vulnerable.
Yes.
Right? So we're, you know, the Tulsa, yes.
Even like Buxton and Amherstburg.
Yeah, but then they came and bulldozed Africville,
exactly.
right? And they bulldozed communities in New Brunswick, and they bulldozed communities in Prince Edward Island.
That's true. Yeah.
I think we had a question here too.
Hi, I was just gonna say I'm from outside of Cornwall, Glengarry girl.
and you safe? You feel safe?
I will say I'm blessed from a community where I did feel safe. But the history was lacking. As a child, Black history was not encouraged because the population was not there. Yes. Funny enough, I did a minor in African Studies at York University, and this history was not taught either. So I'm like, I'm being dragged here in my 42nd year of life, relearning history, right? But I guess my comment...
That's the exposed part.
That's the exposed part, exactly. I'll definitely say sitting here, it's been an emotional roller coaster. And thank you for your emotional labor in putting this together. But I guess my question is, what's next? There's been a lot of performative action, so I think of the renaming of Yonge Dundas Square to Sankofa Square and what that means to the broader Canada and the Black community. I did not really see that support for the renaming. Looking at social media, even looking at the social media posts for this event, before a lot of it was kind of cleaned up, there was a lot of negative comments that were very disheartening. But how do we get this information out to the broader community in a way where we can acknowledge our history and start seeing shift? Because I feel like that's where we get stuck all the time. The history, we have the conversations, but what do we do from here? Where do we go from here? I don't know if that's something we can solve in the next few minutes, but just a thought, if you have any
like
thoughts.
Action, like where's the action?
Where's the action? Where's the action? Because we have this for, I think you said till the end of December, but after the exhibition broader is over, where are the spaces for our history, like how they have, is it Edson House? I forget the name of it, at Lakeshore?
Adamson Estate?
Addison. Where do we have our permanent structure where we have that, where we can go and have a reflection room, where we can go and study, like where do we have those spaces here in Canada? And again, what are the next steps? What are we going to take from this and make it a legacy? I guess that's my question.
I mean, I can try to answer. I mean, I think There's actually a YouTube person, not a YouTube, but a Patreon person that I really follow, and she's really inspirational. And one of the things that she always reminds people is that, you know, the civil rights movement, of, if you want to say, started in 1965, really started in the 19th century. Like, there are people who started that never saw what happened. And if we think of women's suffrage, 1849, they didn't get the vote till 1920. So all those people died and never saw the victory. So I think our perception of time and change needs to change. Like, is it going to be next week? Is it going to be next year? Is it going to be 25 years from now? Like, I think of the timeline, it's really hard to say, but I know that energy, I just believe this in my own life, energy follows energy. And one of the reasons I think Black people collectively around the world, we have always been able to overcome the hardest of circumstances is because every generation there was a collective energy on change. And change came, maybe not fully as was imagined, but things kept moving in a direction because people did not take their foot off the pedal, so to speak. So I just think there's that, like there is a strength and power in momentum. And even when things seem really tough, to never stopping that momentum. It's like rolling something down a hill. It's just gonna keep picking up everything, and by the time it gets to the bottom, right, it's this huge ball. And I think that's really for me, what change looks like, as opposed to giving you a specific tangible outcome. Because even as a mortal, my tangible outcome will probably still be limiting to what the Creator has in mind for a tangible outcome. Like, my mind can only limit to what I've known, right? And I think that, to me, is the spirit of change. And in my generation, I'm around your same age, I think we just got lazy, to be honest. If not to criticize myself, but if you grew up in the 90s, we're starting to see, right? Everyone was like, oh, the music, now we realize that a lot of that was just made up. And I think a lot of people are having to recenter, like, the culture of that era was not real. And it might have been a distraction of why we were young at that time and we weren't really being active in the kinds of engagements that maybe we could have had. And now we're realizing, oh my goodness, I'm in my 40s, I think it's time. So maybe it's the right time. You know, like, maybe all that needed to happen so that now we realize that if you want change to happen in the world, stop waiting for someone. Like, it starts with you. And I think just having something like this at the City of Mississauga is an important step, right? So I think that's the best way I can answer the question without giving you a tangible outcome.
Did you want to say something? I think every generation does its best, and I think you asking that question is telling us that racism is still real, because you're saying we're the spaces. So every generation, it's almost like somebody wrote a book called The Children of Sisyphus. And you know the story of Sisyphus. He pushes the boulder up the hill, he reaches the top, it rolls down, then he has to go and push it back up. So, poor Sisyphus. So that's how it has been for Black people within these Americas, and even outside. But let's focus on the Americas, where we had enslavement for, let's say, 300 years, and where full freedom and full civil rights did not happen. To this day, it hasn't happened, right? If you look at immigration policies and so on, you see in every one of these systems, there's an anti-Black logic. At the same time, though, people have fought. If you look at the generation of the 50s with Bramley Armstrong and Stanley Grizzell and those people who went to Ottawa to lobby the government of Canada to say you have to remove the barriers from Black people coming into Canada. Because for 100 years, Black people were barred as immigrants from coming into Canada. And that tells you something about how the Black people who were living here were treated. So every generation, the people build community centers, right? The whole Marcus Garvey movement in Canada, when Marcus Garvey was deported from the United States, the conventions started to be held in Canada, whether it was in Ontario or Nova Scotia. There were 11 conventions that were held in Canada. And these are community building movements. So we've had the community centers, we've built the churches, the whole church movement for 300 years were built by Black people. So it's not as if, the generations didn't do anything. They did. Each generation takes it. If we say to ourselves, this is where we want to be, this is where we're going to live, this is where we're going to raise families, then we have to enter the struggle. If we say, well, I don't want to do that, I'm going to go off to, I don't know, Maui or someplace, or the Seychelles, then maybe not, right? Then we can go off. But if we say this is where we're going to be, we have to become actively engaged in the struggle. So maybe ask yourself, what can you do? Right? In terms of spaces, the whole thing about building a Black museum has been on the agenda for the past 30 years, right? But, the Adamson Estate and the Museums of Mississauga, Museums of Toronto, etc., there's so many museums across Ontario, especially Southern Ontario, where this history is told. So it's not as if we don't have anything. It's not as if we don't have people who are doing the work, who are doing this labor. As someone said, this is a righteous burden that we carry. And so you're asking that question is saying, yes, not yet Uhuru. And if there's not yet Uhuru, then what are we doing about it? But it's not as if people haven't done. You think of the banning of the book, The Little Black Sambo in 1957, that took like a 3-year agitation for that to happen. And we are in a situation now where my parents only had grade 8 education. My grandparents had grade 4 education. I have a PhD. And so progress is made. Now you have more people, Black people, in the Canadian Academy than any time before. When I was doing my PhD, you could count 1 or 2 people.
She's telling the absolute facts.
Right?
Absolute facts.
So, things are happening. Across this country, Black people have been at the forefront of the civil rights movement in this country, which benefits not only the Black community, but everybody else. One of the sad things, you talk about this history is not written, then many people, or the immigrants come, and they want to diss Black people, right? Without knowing that the groundbreaking work that the Black communities for the past 200 years have done in this country to advance civil rights.
And I just want to talk a little bit on a micro level in Mississauga itself, because I feel like we're kind of constantly playing catch up with all this. You look at the first Peel historian, William Perkins Bull, and he was known to be a fairly bigoted person. In one kind of story, he was actually in a legal dispute with a neighbor or someone, I think they were in Brampton, and he just wrote them out of the history. He was like, no, they just didn't exist. They just did not exist. And so, if he doesn't care about you, you're off the historic record. And so, historiography is subjective in that sense, and it took, unfortunately, far too long for people to actually stand up and say, no, this story is important and needs to be told. So, we're constantly playing catch up, and then, there's people, like I was saying, oh my gosh, I really want to sit down and have a coffee with this person, ask them some questions. Well, they're gone. I can't do that. I don't think Arnold Ford, for example, had any kids. So who do you ask now? And so we have to be proactive now and go out into the communities and engage these people. And I was reading this interesting book about Japanese Canadians, and this one and the author talked about how, so she did a lot of oral histories with people, and she talked about how the people were very apprehensive to talk to her, and it took her becoming really friends, almost family with these people for like 30 years before they would even sit down and have their voices recorded. And so, you know, so a lot of people say like, well, like, why would you want to talk to me, right? Like, you know, I remember when I would be talking to my grandfather, you know, and he would talk about a lot about being a Jamaican living in England, and, you know, and just mention casually like, oh yeah, and my brother, you know, was being with the rubber hose by the police because they thought he was another Jamaican, because, oh, they all look alike, you know? And I'd be like, what? Like, this needs to be recorded. He's like, who cares about us? Like, we're poor Jamaicans. Like, who cares about us? And I was like, I care, actually. I think we should all care about this, Granddad. You know, and I wish I had more time to sit down with him and talk to him before he passed away on more issues. And so I think now, like, we really have to be proactive and go out into these communities. The elders are passing away with every single year, and we have to go and we have to ask these questions and leave future historians with more than what we started with. Because we, as you were saying, there was not that much, there was not that many people that were doing this work, and so I hope, I pray that in 100 years, someone will say, okay, well, at least we had, it's not perfect, but at least we had more than what they had starting off with, so.
Just real quick, okay, real quick. I keep telling people this, start creating your own archive of your life. Like, record your life. You came to this event today, print the poster and put it somewhere. Like, start to record your life, because sometimes we say things like, oh, there's nothing. And if you were to really think about it, back in the day, you probably went to a lot of things like this. It's just that you didn't keep the materiality of it. So it gets lost in the memory. So one of the important things, and to your point about elders passing away and getting old, and a lot of that is, what are they gonna do with all their stuff? Start engaging with your older parents, the grandparents. Say, do you have photo albums? Do you have anything? And start to see that as a personal record to keep. Because in those unimportant images that they don't think are important, you might find something that is like, oh my, like you might see the importance. And that could lead you on a whole personal journey that you never thought. And next thing you know, you're having gatherings at your home. And next thing you know, you're building community out of a story that you found in your own personal narrative. So I really want to encourage people to start doing that too, to keep your own record. You can archive your life. You don't have to go into an archive to discover someone else's life.
And just to add, yeah, I mean, you all here, you are important, and I was just looking into the audience and seeing my colleague Tracy, who's a collections assistant at Museums of Mississauga, and like these, I can guarantee you that these people care, and that they want these stories.
Tracy cares.
Yes, yeah, there she is over there. A round of applause for Tracy. Because they care, and so, you know, and so bring in your memoir, your archive, and be like, here it is. Like, you know, and trust me, they will be like, wow, okay, thank you very much, you know, so.
Okay, thank you.
We have one last question.
Yes, it's not a question so much as comments, actually. And particularly thanking you, Dr. Cooper, for bringing this to Mississauga. And while I'm at it, I really have to thank the museum as well for entertaining this idea. I think it's also, I didn't realize that in 2025, I would be so moved by all this information. I always knew there was slavery in Canada, but seeing it in this form, Dr. Cooper, has really been beneficial to all of us. So once again, thank you. And by the way, to the rest of the panel, thank you very much. As part of the Congress of Black Women, I wonder if we cannot speak to the museums to ask them. There are lots of places in Mississauga where I think some of this information could be housed permanently.
And I'm wondering if we can't have that conversation, and it's certainly something I think we would like to be able to do. But once again, thank you very much. Now you come back, Elizabeth. I'm saying as part of the Congress of Black Women, perhaps we could have a conversation with the museum about housing some of these exhibits or similar exhibits around Black history.
Thank you,
We can
Valerie.
talk. Thank
We
you.
would love that, yes, thank you. So we had our last comment. I'm Elizabeth, I work at the Museums of Mississauga. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for joining us and just cracking our heads wide open with all of this incredible knowledge. Thank you so very much. Dr. Cooper, during your talk earlier, I believe you mentioned that you had a poem from the perspective of one of the enslaved women, Peggy Pompadour. Is that a poem that you are able to share with us tonight, perhaps to close out the evening?
I read it. I started off with it.
You started off with
Yeah.
it? Oh, I apologize. I thought that
Maybe
was
it didn't
from the
sound like a
perspective
poem.
of the...
No, I did.
There was a response. Like you said,
The second part, yeah.
It was the second
I did
part.
say there was a response, which I'm writing. It's not written yet.
Oh.
Because this is the voice of Elizabeth Russell, the enslaver woman, from her diary saying all these things about Peggy. No, part two is Peggy responding to Elizabeth Russell and telling her own story, her own giving her own perspective. Sorry.
So we look forward to that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it's from my book, Black Matters. It's with me, author, and Wilfred Rosser, the photographer. So it's in the better bookshops, or buy it online, whatever. Ah.
So as we conclude this insightful conversation, I'd like to thank everyone who asked such thought-provoking questions. I think really some of the key takeaways I think we all learned today. I think we learned a lot of things. Really is challenging that narrative of Canada being that quote-unquote safe haven, seeing the other aspects of what our history entails, really understanding slavery and Black resistance from a Canadian perspective. Really, once again, want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Cooper, Dr. Thompson, and Justine as well for a powerful and enlightening evening. I think tonight's discussion really reminded us that Black history is Canadian history. We've seen the path paved by Black Canadians, and the diversity of our experience are proof that we're more than a monolith. History is not only something that we look back on, it's something we write every day. And I think as we reflect on these lessons shared by our panelists, let's all commit to continue to doing the work, learning, teaching, amplifying these stories of these underrepresented voices. And once again, to our speakers, thank you for that insight, being authentic. I think that was one of the most important things I noticed today. And also, thank you to the audience for being so engaged and being a part of this important conversation. Also want to extend a thank you to the Black Employee Resource Group. I know quite a few of you are present for City of Mississauga. Also the Friends of the Museums of Mississauga as well. Heritage Mississauga, the Mississauga Foundation, and also the Living Arts Center staff as well. I definitely want to extend a thank you to Elizabeth and Amanda and their team for all the work that they've done. I know this isn't noted, but just from my personal experience with this museum team, I think the best thing that they do is listen to the Black voices of the city. They make us feel seen, they make us feel understood, and we truly appreciate that. And thank you all. Have a great evening, everyone.